Okay, so we're in the last portion of my audio recording. Again, my pronunciations are horrid, but this audio recording will start on page 40. So we'll start at the first full sentence. So just remember, as you're reading this, keep track of who's who, keep track of the characters, and keep track of the living conditions at this prison camp. Futukov, that jackal, had come up closer to, and now stood opposite Tsar, watching his mouth with blazing eyes. Shukov had finished his last pinch of tobacco and saw no prospects of acquiring any more before evening. Every nerve in his body was taut. All his longing was concentrated in that cigarette butt, which meant more to him now, it seemed, than freedom itself. But he would never lower himself like that, Futukov. He would never look at a man's mouth. Tsar was a hodgepodge of nationalities. Greek, Jew, Gypsy, you couldn't make out which. He was still young, he'd made films, but he hadn't finished his first when they arrested him. He wore a dark, thick, tangled mustache. They hadn't shaved it off in the camp because that was the way he looked in the photograph in his dossier. Tsar Markovich, slobbered Fetikov, unable to restrain himself. Give us a puff. His face twitched with greedy desire. Tsar slightly raised the lids that drooped low over his black eyes and looked at Fetikov. It's because he didn't want to be interrupted while smoking, and asked for a puff that he had taken up a pipe. He didn't begrudge the tobacco. He resented the interruption in his chain of thought. He smoked to stimulate his mind and to set his ideas flowing. But the moment he lighted a cigarette, he read in several pairs of eyes an unspoken plea for the butt. Tsar turned to Shukov and said, "Take it, Ivan Denisovich." And with his thumb, he pushed the smoldering cigarette butt out of the short amber holder. Shukov started, though it was exactly what he had expected of Tsar, and gratefully hurried to take the butt with one hand while slipping the other hand in to prevent it from dropping. He didn't resent the fact that Tsar felt squeamish about letting him finish the cigarette in the holder. Some had clean mouths, some had foul, and he didn't burn his hardened fingers as they touched the glowing end. The main thing was he had to cut out that jackal Fetikov and now could go on drawing and smoke until his lips were scorched. The smoke crept and flowed through his whole hungry body, making his head and feet respond to it. Just at that blissful moment, he heard a shout, "They're stripping our undershirts off us!" Such was the prisoner's life. Shukov had grown accustomed to it. All you could do was to look out they didn't leap at your throat. But why the undershirts? The camp commandant himself had issued them. No, something was wrong. There were still squads ahead of them before it was their turn to be frisked. Everyone in the 104th looked about. They saw Lieutenant Volkovo, the security chief, stride out of the staff quarters and shout something to the guards. And the guards, who when Volkovo wasn't around, carried out the frisking perfunctorily, now flung themselves into their work with savage zeal. "Unbutton your shirts," the sergeant shouted. Volkovo was as unpopular with the prisoners as with the guards. Even the camp commandant was said to be afraid of him. God had named the bastard appropriately. He was a wolf indeed, and looked it. He was dark, tall, with a scowl, very quick in his movements. He turned up from behind a barracks with a "what's going on here?" There was no hiding from him. At first, in '49, he'd been in the habit of carrying a whip of plaited leather as thick as his forearm. He was said to have used it for flogging in the cells, or when the prisoners would be standing in a group near a barracks at the evening count, he'd slink up from behind and lash out at someone's neck with... Okay, so now might be a good time to do your sticky note summary. Make sure you know who the people are. Make sure you know the descriptions of the people. So he'd slink up from behind and lash out someone's neck with a, "Why aren't you standing in line, slobs?" The men would dash away in a wave. Stung by the blow, his victim would put a hand to his neck and wipe away the blood, and he'd hold his tongue for fear of the cells. Now, for some reason, Volkovo had stopped carrying his whip. When the weather was cold, the guards were fairly lenient in the morning, though not in the evening. The prisoners untied their belts and flung their coats wide open. They advanced 5 abreast, and 5 guards stood waiting to frisk them. The guards slapped their hands down the belted jackets, ran right over the pants pocket, the only one permitted by regulation, and reluctant to pull off their gloves, felt any object that puzzled them, asking lazily, "What's that?" What was there to look for on a prisoner at the morning roll call? A knife? But knives weren't taken out of the camp. They were brought into it. In the morning, they had to make sure a prisoner wasn't taking 6 pounds of bread with him, meaning to escape with it. There was a time when they were so scared of the quarter-pound hunks the prisoners took to eat with their dinner that each of the squads had to make a wooden case for carrying the whole ration after collecting it piece by piece from the men. What they reckoned to gain by the stupidity was beyond imagining. More likely, it was just another way of tormenting people, giving them something extra to worry about. It meant taking a nibble at your hunk, making your mark on it, so to speak, and then putting it in the case. But anyway, the pieces were as alike as two peas. They were all cut off of the same loaf. During the march, it preyed on your mind. You tortured yourself by imagining that someone else's bit of the ration might be substituted for yours. Why, good friends quarreled about it, even to the point of fighting. But one day, 3 prisoners escaped in a truck from the worksite and took one of those cases of bread with them. They brought the authorities to their senses. They chopped up all the boxes in the guards' room. Everyone carried his own hunk, they said. At first this search, they also had to make sure that no one was wearing civvies under the camp outfit. But after all, every prisoner had his civvies removed from him down to the very last garment, and they wouldn't be returned. They were told until they served their term, no one had served his term in the camp. Sometimes the guards frisked you for letters that might have been sent through civilians. But if they were going to search every prisoner for letters, they'd be fussing around till dinner time. Volkov, however, had shouted that they were to search for something, and so the guards peeled off their gloves, ordered everyone to pull up his jacket, where every little bit of the barrack room warmth was treasured, and unbuttoned his shirt. Then they strode up to run their paws over the Zeks and find out whether any of them might have slipped on something against the rules. A prisoner was allowed to wear a shirt and an undershirt. He was to be stripped of anything else. Such were Volkov's instructions passed down the ranks by the prisoners. The squads had been frisked earlier were in luck. Some of them had already been passed through the gates, but the rest had to bare their chests, and anyone who had slipped on an extra garment had to take it off on the spot and were out there in the cold. That's how it started, but it resulted in a fine mix-up. A gap formed in the column, and at the gates, the escort began shouting, "Get a move on! Get a move on!" So when it was turn of the 104th to be frisked, they had to ease up a bit. Volkov told the guards to take the names of anyone who might be wearing extra garments. The culprits were to surrender them in person to personal property that evening with a written explanation of how and why they had hidden the garments. Zhukov was in regulation dress. "Come on, palm me as hard as you like. There's nothing but my soul, and again, you go ahead and do your sticky note summary. So go ahead and do your sticky note summary for pages 42 and 43. All right. There's nothing but my soul in my chest. So we're on page 44 now. But they made a note that Tsar was wearing a flannel vest and that Buvovsky, it seemed, had put on a vest or a cummerbund or something. Buvovsky protested. He'd been in camp less than 3 months, a former Navy commander who still couldn't get his destroyer out of his system. "You got no right to strip men in the cold. You don't know Article 9 of the Criminal Code." But they did have the right. They knew the code. You, friend, are the one who doesn't know it. "You're behaving like Soviet people," Buvovsky went on saying. "You're not behaving like communists." Oh, look at that. Interesting commentary, right? Volkov had put up with the reference to the criminal code, but this made him wince, and like black lightning he flashed, 10 days in the guardhouse, and aside to the sergeant, starting from this evening. They didn't like putting a man in the cells in the morning. It meant loss of his work for a whole day. Let him sweat blood in the meantime and be put in the cells in the evening. The prisoner lay just over there to the left of the parade ground, a brick building with 2 wings. The second wing had been added that autumn. There wasn't enough room in the first. The prison had 18 cells besides those for solitary confinement, which were fenced off. The entire camp was log-built except for that brick prison. The cold had got under the men's shirts, and now it was there to stay. After that wrapping up had been in vain, Zhukov's back was giving him hell. How he longed to be in bed in the infirmary, fast asleep. He wanted nothing else, under the heaviest of blankets. The Zeks stood in front of the gates, buttoning their coats, tying a rope around their bellies, and from outside the escort shouted, "Come on, come on!" And from behind a guard urged him on, "Move along, move along." The first gate, the border zone. The second gate, railings along each side near the gatehouse. "Halt!" shouted a sentry. Like a flock of sheep, form 5s. It was growing light. The escort's fire was burning itself out behind the gatehouse. They always lit a fire before the prisoners were sent out to work, to keep themselves warm and to be able to see more clearly while counting. One of the gate guards counted in a loud, brisk voice, first, second, third, and the prisoners, in ranks of 5, separated from the rest and marched ahead so that they could be watched from front and behind. 5 heads, 5 backs, 10 legs. A second gate guard, a checker, stood at the next rail in silence, verifying the count. And in addition, a lieutenant stood watching. That was camp from the side. A man is worth more than gold. If there was one head short when they got past the barbed wire, you had to replace it with your own. Once more, the squad came together. And now it was the turn of the sergeant of the escort to count. First, second, third. And each rank of the 5 drew away and marched forward separately. And on the other side of the wire, the assistant had verified the count, and another lieutenant stood by and watched. That was from the side of the escort. No one dared make a mistake. If you signed for one head too many, you filled the gap with your own. There were escort guards all over the place. They flung a semicircle around the column on its way to the power station, their machine guns sticking out and pointing right at your face, and there were 10 guards with gray dogs. One dog bared its fangs as if laughing at the prisoners. All right, guys, that's the end of your reading assignment. Go ahead and do your sticky note summary. Make sure to prepare for your reading quiz. Make sure you know the names, what they do, and make sure you know you're able to summarize the camp living conditions. God bless you and have a good day.